Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am getting ready to talk about what I did for this month's mood board challenge. If you haven't seen the challenge or thought about it yet, it is a soft grunge twist, and the colors are black and a pinkish or a kind of a coralish color on there. The scrapbooking kit goes fabulously with it, as does the mixed media kit, the cards, tags, and more kit. You could really come up with anything from any of the kits that would fit the challenge this month. For me, I decided to combine the scrapbooking kit and the mixed media kit. I used the mediums from the mixed media kit, and I used a couple of the sheets and a lot of the fussy cut pieces or the pre-cut die cut pieces from the paper pack. I have some black gesso already on my clipboard. I didn't need any gesso on the canvas. I did decide to do two smaller mixed media projects with this because I couldn't decide which one I really wanted to do more. And since they are smaller mixed media projects and I would be doing the same basic techniques for each one, I figured I would just work on them both side by side. So the first thing I wanted to do was get my papers picked out and get my placement figured out, what parts of the pattern on the papers I wanted. For the clipboard, I just placed the clipboard down over the section of the pattern paper I wanted to use, traced around it, and cut it out. I used the 10 millimeter punch on my 3-way corner punch to round my corners. It's really very close to matching the corners on the clipboard, and I was going to be distressing the edges so it didn't have to be an exactly perfect fit anyhow. And to try to create the look that the clip was on top of the paper, like the pattern paper had always been part of the clipboard, I rough cut out around where that clip was so that I could piece it all back together in the end. And then for the canvas, I cut approximately a 4x10 piece of the paper out, and that was because I wanted the roses from this section of the paper to stay against the edge of the canvas surface, but I also didn't want the white edges of the canvas to show. So I cut out a 4x10-ish piece of the pattern paper, and that was so that I could wrap the left side around the edge of the canvas and the bottom around the edge of the canvas. And then I added some of that glittery pattern paper, the half sheet from the paper pack. I added extra pieces of that on to wrap around the right edge and the top of the canvas. It was really all just about what I wanted showing determined how I pieced everything together. I used double-sided tape to piece together the glittery print paper with my main paper for my canvas, and that was more to hold it together for the wrapping process than anything else. I wasn't particularly worried about it coming apart after everything was all said and done, because I do use some matte medium to adhere everything down. My edges of my clipboard paper are distressed, and I just came through and made a few ragged tears on the edges, and then just used the handle of a paintbrush to roll them up. I decided I wanted to add just a few pieces of that same glittery paper underneath those rolled up sections. It just gives another layer to the entire piece, a little bit more visual interest. And then I just come in, I use some matte medium to start gluing all of my pieces in place. with my main pattern paper on the clipboard, I start with the smaller glittery pieces just to make sure that they are going to get lined up where I want them. And since I had the matte medium out, I figured I might as well just start trying to get as much glued down as possible. I put a fairly good coat on the canvas, spread it out. I really wanted to make sure that once it was dry, that paper would stay put. I get my piece in place, and it would have been a lot easier if I had added that glittery print paper to the two edges first, but for reasons which I cannot possibly tell you, for some reason at the time I was doing this, it just made more sense to me to try to work with a single sheet, or pretend I was working with a single sheet. I still don't know why, but yeah, well, it came together in the end anyhow. I added the double-sided tape just so that when I folded my edges over, they would be able to get held into place while waiting for that matte medium to finish drying. I tried to keep my corners as bulk free as possible. I trimmed down the excess, made sure they didn't stick out from the top or the edge. Just tried to really get everything as smooth as possible. And then just to give some protection to the papers for the work that I would be doing, I added that matte medium to them. I added the matte medium all over the surface of the paper that is on the canvas. I used the matte medium to glue down my main background paper, protected the surface of my small glittery pieces that are going under the tears, and added a little bit of the matte medium to the surface of the pattern paper that I put on the clipboard. And then I just set everything off and really wanted to make sure that that matte medium was completely dry before I moved on to the next parts of my project. And this part would have been easier if I had done it before I had tried to glue down the paper. But when I had the matte medium out and I was deciding to glue everything down, I hadn't fully decided exactly what I wanted to do. So here I am, just carefully adding some of the Marcasite Stardust butter to my curled up edges. I add some to the corners of the clipboard, and I add it to the metal clip on the clipboard. And then to just smooth out the corners on the canvas and smooth out the edges, I just used some sandpaper. It didn't really matter how roughed up it got, as long as they were a little more rounded, because I do come in and I add some of the champagne stardust butter to the edges and the corners of my canvas. After my stardust butters had dried, I came in with some of the Lindy's, and I did start out slow, just dabbing it on around the edges of the paper on the clipboard. Started just spreading it out a little bit, just seeing exactly how dark it was going to look against the backgrounds. And then I just came in and then just sprayed straight onto my surfaces. If I did get puddles that were maybe a little too heavy, I would just soak them up real quick. I used water just to help move the color around. And then I set them up and let that Lindy's and the water just dry overnight to make sure that it was all the way dry. After everything had had a chance to dry, I came in and I gave them a good spray with some workable fixative just to make sure that that Lindy's stayed put while I continued working on everything. I picked out the die cut pieces and the fussy cut pieces that I figured I would want to use. After I had all of that picked out, then I turned them over. I added a coating of some of the champagne stardust butter to the backs of them, just so they weren't so stark white. I separated the leaves on the die cut pieces. I separated some of the petals on some of the flowers, and that was just so that when the time came when I was putting them down, I would be able to give them a little bit more shape. I sorted the die cut pieces that I wanted to use on each surface, or at least that I figured I would be using on each surface. The only pieces I ended up not using were the 2 butterflies. And then I just used some 3D matte gel and started getting all of my fussy cut and die cut pieces put in place. I added a little bit of the Lindy's onto my clusters and the surface on my clock, and a little bit of water just to spread it out. My die cut pieces and my fussy cut pieces don't have any kind of protection on them. There's no gesso or workable fixative or anything like that. I just sprayed them and just figured I'd let the Lindy's soak in and grunge them up a bit. And now, after that Lindy's had had a chance to dry, I came in with some matte varnish. It reactivated the Lindy's a little bit, but I also worked relatively fast. I tried to work as fast as possible, and I spread it all over on my clusters, my clock faces, and a bit on the and all over the surface of my clipboard paper and my canvas paper. After that varnish had dried, and it really doesn't take very long at all, I came in and started trying to work out how I wanted to use the Prima flowers on my 2 mixed media pieces, just playing around with them a little bit. Added my 3D matte gel to them and started getting them in place. I added a bit of varnish onto the surface of the flowers. I didn't really try to soak every little bit of them or cover every little bit of them, but I did want to add a little bit of protection to at least the sections that would most likely be getting some more treatment to them, or getting some more treatment on them. I got to work on picking out which little sentiments or phrases or I'm not sure, sayings that were in the paper pack, and just picked out the 2 I wanted to use on my surfaces and got them ready, shaped them up, trimmed them down so that they would fit the way I wanted them to. I backed them with a bit of some pretty heavy chipboard just to make sure that they would remain stable, since they were going to be rather lifted above the surface of the clock. They weren't going to be put down flat. They would be sort of hanging out on the edges of the flowers. I also gave their surface a coating of the matte varnish and lit that dry, and that was just to protect them. And I did that before I did add them to the chipboard backings. I decided to come in with the 2 Stardust butters and just brush them on rather lightly to the edges of the Prima flowers I had put on, and maybe just add a little bit more to my previous areas on my backgrounds, a little bit more on the clip, a little bit more around the corners and the edges. I added the marcasite to the edges of the 2 sayings that I had decided to use. While my sayings were drying to their pieces of chipboard, I went to work on adding my final touches to everything. I used some soft matte gel, some art stones, and some mini art stones, and just started brushing them onto the surface of my flowers. So as you can see, there really wasn't a whole lot really to these. They do actually come together fairly quickly. So I hope that they gave you some ideas of what you could do with your scrapbooking kit, or your mixed media kit, or your cards, tags, and more kit, or a combination of your kits, and gave you some ideas or some inspiration of what you can do for this month's mood board challenge. I have my grunginess on there. They go with my flowers. The reason I kept the Prima flowers for the soft part of the soft grunge. They don't have a lot of work on them. I just had to add a little bit of that Stardust butter to their edges just to kind of get them to blend in a little bit. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications if you haven't already. Give us a thumbs up and feel free to share this video. Thank you, and I will see you again next week.